Welcome. Thank you so much for joining L&D Cares and for joining the session this morning. So just want to start off by introducing myself. And if people can chat, hopefully you can see my screen, my slide deck. If you can't, please go ahead and share that in the chat and let me know, because everything looks great on my end. Oh, good, I'm getting some thumbs up. Use those emoticons, I love those. I love interacting with you guys. So today we're going to focus on being your authentic self during the interview process, and in the age of diversity and inclusion, especially, I believe that an interview process is a two-way street, and you're interviewing a company just as much as they're interviewing you. So how do you do that throughout the process? Because it's really perceived that employers have the upper hand, but you have just as much say in your interview process and who you work for and what you do on some level as they do. So before I dive in, let me tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Jessica Segal. I live in Atlanta, and I work at a global software company. We do SaaS and software products specifically for the legal vertical. Prior to that, I've been there about 15 months, so I went through a job search and interview process not too long ago myself. Prior to that, I worked in the nonprofit industry for about 13 years, so it was a big change. I interviewed with over 30 companies, not 30 interviews, more than 30 companies, really trying to find the right place and the right culture and environment for me. So today, to make it interesting, I thought that we could take some lessons from Aladdin and use the movie Aladdin as our case study for what happens when you're your authentic self versus maybe lying about your qualifications throughout the job and interview process. So let's go ahead. Nope. There we go. So let's go ahead and meet our cast. And when I say Aladdin, I'm a child of the 80s. I might have just aged myself, and that's okay. So I'm a purist. I fully support the cartoon version, the live action version that came out a couple years ago. It didn't ruin my childhood, but I'm less into it than I was the cartoon version. So for purposes of when I say Aladdin, this is the Aladdin that I'm referring to. So let's meet our cast real quick. So we have two different candidates for the same job. We have Aladdin, and then we have Prince Ali. So those are our two candidates that we'll be talking about throughout the morning together. We have Raja, who's Princess Jasmine's pet tiger, who represents our HR recruiter that you meet throughout the interview process. We have Jafar, who represents our self-doubt and inner demons that we all have at certain points throughout our especially interview processes, second-guessing ourselves. Jasmine represents the hiring manager, Princess Jasmine. Abu, which is the best picture, represents our support network and best friend. The Sultan represents the CEO of the corporation. Magic Carpet represents our self-guide, our inner guide, and our kind of hopefully inner cheerleader. And then last but not least, the Genie represents our career coach. So keep these in mind. These characters are going to be popping up throughout our morning together. So let's first talk about Prince Ali. So hopefully most of you are somewhat familiar with the Aladdin story, but basically Prince Ali was a version of Aladdin when he wasn't really being true to who he was. And the reason Aladdin decided to become Prince Ali was because he thought he needed to be a prince in order to meet and marry Jasmine and be considered as a candidate to be her husband and ultimately be the Sultan. Well, he wasn't a prince, he wasn't born a prince, but once he met the Genie, that was his first wish, and he became the prince. But once he was the prince, he wasn't really being true to himself or who he was. He wasn't putting his authentic self out there in the interview process. And things really, if you think about it in the movie, once he was Prince Ali, things really didn't go so great for him. He got arrested, he got thrown in prison. The prison guards tried to drown him. They tied him to the chair and threw him in the water. He got banished to the ends of the earth with a magic carpet and Abu and that big snowy abyss. Like, once he was Prince Ali, things really did not go so great for him. But when he was Aladdin at the beginning of the movie, he was really comfortable with where he was. He didn't have the fanciest apartment or, the most luxurious life, but he was really comfortable with himself and who he was. And you saw that pretty early on. He was resourceful. He figured out how to navigate, and he really was doing okay. So once he was Aladdin when he met the Genie, and he got his 3 wishes in the Cave of Wonders where it all started. So most of the movie he actually spent as Prince Ali and not Aladdin. But then towards the end, even when he was Prince Ali, you saw certain parts that, he was really showing his true self through, and Princess Jasmine, that seemed to resonate with her. So towards the end of the movie, when he came clean and, basically said, I don't think that I could be your husband because I'm not a prince. I'm really just a regular dude. I'm just a regular guy. The Sultan, who was the CEO of the corporation, saw all of this and said, you know what? We really like you and we respect who you are and everything that you've done. And let's go ahead and change those job requirements. Maybe it's been like this for hundreds of years, but we think you're the right guy for the job. And we're going to go ahead and change those job requirements so the princess can marry whoever she wants. And if it's a prince, cool. And if it's not a prince, also cool. So the Sultan at the end of the movie actually changed those job requirements, and Princess Jasmine was able to choose her ideal candidate. And that was Aladdin. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen the movie. Sorry. Hopefully you have at this point. And then last but not least, I put on here, one of the things that Aladdin did towards the end of the movie was he freed the genie from the bottle. He used his third and final wish to free the genie. And just always keep that in mind for whether it's your career coach, a mentor, a friend, of how once you finally land and you land that job, how we're showing and expressing gratitude to those who helped us along the way. All right, so areas to consider, because once again, let's go back to that concept of you're interviewing a company as much as they're interviewing you. So for purposes of our limited time together, we're going to focus on 3 areas together. So how you assess a cultural fit, how you assess your career path, and if the potential role might help you on your career path, and then your core and your personal values and how those might align with the company values as well. So let's start off with cultural fit. So here's our cast of characters that I would say are involved in this part. So we have the culture, you start experiencing it the minute you have your first interaction with HR. Of course, you spend a good bit of time with the hiring manager, which is Princess Jasmine. You're being your authentic self the whole time. You're being your Aladdin, not your Prince Ali. And also culture can definitely permeate from the top down as well from our CEO and C-suite folks. So when you're talking about cultural fit, you want to look at things like work environment, especially now in the era of COVID. What works for you? Do you need to be remote because of family, or do you want to be not remote because of family? Either one's okay. There's no right and there's no wrong. It's just a matter of what works for you in your life and what's the work environment currently for the company, and what are they going to be doing, post-COVID, what's on their plan and how that may or may not work with your life. After work environment, let's talk about personality and interpersonal interactions that you have throughout the interview process. So every person that you interact with at that company, it's representing the culture. Even when I walked in, so I was hired pre-COVID, I've been with my company about 15 months. When I walked into the office for an interview, I observed, do people look happy to be there? Are people running around ripping their hair out, looking like they want to cry? What was the environment and the culture like? It seemed to be pretty good. But every interaction you have, you can really just tell about the company culture, people's work-life balance. So ask about that during the interview process. What's the daily schedule? Average hours per week. Again, does that work for you? Does it work for your schedule? There's companies that the average might be, 60 plus hours a week. There's companies that really strive to help people maintain that positive work-life balance. Depending on where you are in life, none of it's good or bad. It's just a matter of what works for you and what your priorities are. And then something else to think about in culture is hopefully you spend a good bit of time during the interview process getting to meet the team that you'd be working with and getting to understand the dynamics, their work style, and think about what might be compatible with you, but also think about what might be a little bit different that can complement or maybe fill in the holes of things that you're not so great at. So I love working with data nerds because I'm not an analytical data person, but I love looking at it. I just don't want to crunch the numbers. I want somebody to do that and just hand it to me, and then I can look at it and observe and apply that. All right, so next let's talk about our career path. So when you're looking at a job, think about how it would propel you on your career path. And notice I didn't say propel you forward or propel you upward, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So when you're thinking about the job, I always think about, not what can I just do that it would be easy for me to do, but what do I want to learn that would really help to make me a more holistic candidate and a more competitive candidate in that job market. So I wanted to look for a job where I had the opportunity to learn new skills. So for the role where I am currently, I had to get certified in a Myers-Briggs type profile that the company uses. I didn't have that certification. Hi, Brandon. I did not have that certification for that Myers-Briggs profile, but we talked about that during my interview process. The company was aware that I didn't have that certification. They were totally fine with me needing to get that certification, giving me the time and paying for me to get that certification. And I've used it a ton and really enjoyed it. So it wasn't a deterrent for the company. It's a very specific certification that not a lot of people have, but I was ready, willing, and made that very known during the interview process that it's not just something I was okay doing, it's something I really wanted to and embraced fully doing. And then when you're talking about your career path, another thing to think about is beyond your full-time job. How are you learning beyond your full-time job and your day-to-day? So I would say the first and the last two we have on here are continued learning and then also building and maintaining your network. So you guys can do check marks on both of those because you all showed up today. So especially being in COVID, we're not going to networking events in person. We're not going to conferences. So how are we continuing to make sure that we're learning new skills, staying up to date on different trends, and then really building, expanding, and maintaining our networks. Also, if you don't have a mentor, it's never too late to find one. So who can help to guide you and make introductions, give you advice, and help to be your genie, your career coach, your mentor throughout your interview process. And then even once you're in a job full time, it's always helpful to have that cast of people behind you who are supporting you. And then other things to think about are volunteer opportunities, whether it's local organizations to meet people in your community or trade organizations to meet people in your industry. And then last but not least, whether you're working full-time, part-time, or in between, it's always an opportunity to pick up contract or part-time work, get a little income, and learn some different skills. So one other thing that I always think about with career path is living in what I would say is a very hierarchical society. We're very focused on this image when we think about our career, right? That corporate ladder and getting to the next rung. So you always want to get to that next run. But I always think about my career as less of a ladder and more of a jungle gym. And sometimes you have to take a small step down or take a step over to ultimately get up and make that move and get to the next level. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. You own the narrative of your career and how you share that. And if it's a role that made sense because maybe it was a lateral move, but you were getting into a totally different industry, or it was a lateral move, but you got to learn some really cool and different skills, or it was one of your target companies that you were just trying to get in the door, there's a number of reasons that it might make more sense to make a lateral or even a small step back to help you ultimately make that step forward. And there's nothing wrong with that, and that is a-okay. So last but not least, let's talk about core values. So when I say core values, I'm talking about those 3 to 5 core values that really help to be your North Star and define and guide you in all the decisions that you make. So hopefully you have some that you can name. If you know what core values are, but maybe can't name yours, there's lots of interesting and free online assessments that you can Google and figure out your core values. And then when you're thinking about your core values, you want to think about the company's core values as well. So what are the values of your potential employer? Some companies have these listed right on their websites. If they don't, that's something that you can ask about during the interview process. Some companies, just like ourselves, may or may not actually have these core values named. But I would say even if a company doesn't have these values named, these values are kind of intrinsic. They're in our DNA, they're in the company's DNA, and they show up in the mission and the vision statement, which most companies do have on their website, or you can ask about during the interview process. So you just want to make sure that your values align some level with the company values, that it's a place that you would be comfortable working. So kind of to bring it all home, let's talk a little bit about being your authentic self. So the past 11 months, 10 and a half months, many of us have had some version of working from home or fully working from home, which makes this whole notion of bringing your whole self to work really, really relevant, because we all have dogs barking in the background and kids running in and out, and it's much harder to keep our personal and professional lives separate, which in some respects is a good thing, and in some respects can be a very complicated thing. Many countries have laws that when you're going through the interview process, there's protected classes that, an potential employer can't ask you about your sexual orientation or your religion. And those practices are in place to help to make the interview process fair and non-discriminatory. So what I would say to that is that that's a great thing, right? We want people to be protected. We want everybody to have a fair chance at any job and not be discriminated against. However, I would say, and I'm a member of what I would consider 3 diversity categories, if you will. I've worked for places that, as somebody of a different religious background, I've worked for an anti-Semitic boss, and that was a horrible experience. I want to work somewhere that the company accepts me for who I am and everything I believe, and I don't need to push it down people's throats. I'm not the person who's walking around preaching or anything like that, but I want to be accepted, know that I can take the days off that I need to take off for holidays. So it's something that was hard to navigate throughout the interview process, but I knew that if I wasn't true to myself and wasn't somewhere that really celebrated, working somewhere that accepted and celebrated me for all of those things, it wasn't somewhere that I wanted to be working. So I know this is a really tricky line to walk. So I navigated that in 2 ways with my current role. So first, the person who referred me to the company has a similar background to me, and we're both members of similar diversity categories, and he's worked there for a few years. So I was able to have really transparent conversations with him. He worked in a totally different department. He was not involved in my interview or hiring process at all, other than the initial referral. So I was able to have those transparent conversations with him about, what it was like working there, if he felt like it was an inclusive environment. So I felt fairly confident going into the interview process that it was a good and open and supportive company. And then I really didn't say anything throughout the interview process. And then once I got to the end of the process and I got to the offer, a lot of my concerns were actually around PTO. Would I be able to use PTO for the holidays that I need to take off of that are not the standard Christmas and Easter, because I don't celebrate those. So I was able to have that conversation with the HR manager and got a sense of holiday time and how I would be able to. So I felt really comfortable and really good and confident in my decision. Yes, it's a risk to put that out there, but at the end of the day, if a company didn't want to hire me because of my diversity categories, or they really weren't comfortable with that, then that's probably not a place that I want to be spending my time and my talent. So everybody has their own level of comfort. I'm not telling you to do that or not to do that, but really think about how you might work that in through the interview process, or how you might vet those things, so you make sure you end up somewhere that they are not only tolerating you, but they're celebrating you. So this was something that really guided me on my job search, and it definitely took longer to end up somewhere that I felt comfortable.
Yeah, Lori. Yeah, and then my whole computer shut down. I know, it's exciting. Okay, so now I logged in that other email account.
Okay, so wait, we had somebody.
And now I'm into the session with Jessica, and Liz is there.
Okay, so you guys are backstage. You're on stage with Bridget. But you have great timing, because I was just about wrapping up.
Okay.
Hey, Liz, can we mute Debbie and them?
Okay, I'm going to.
Okay, perfect. They're supposed to come in like 2 minutes, but we're almost wrapping up, so we are good. All right, so this is actually what got me all started on the Aladdin track. So you have the scene in the movie where Aladdin is going to meet Princess Jasmine, and the genie turns into a bumblebee and says, okay, fine, but whatever you do, just make sure to be yourself. So whatever you do throughout the interview process, just whatever level of authenticity you want to have with yourself, I think the more true you are to yourself, the better the end results end up being. And I'm a big believer in the universe, and we all end up where we're supposed to be, surrounded by the people that we're supposed to be surrounded by. And be as true to yourself as you can be, and hopefully you all land where you're supposed to be, surrounded by the people you're supposed to be. And if there's anything I can do to help any of you along your journeys, please reach out to me on LinkedIn or through L&D Cares. Happy to help however you guys can, because I know it is definitely a hard road to walk. So with that, we have the genie give you all applause for showing up today. And if we have questions, I guess Liz or our host can help to field those.
Too funny. Well, let me back on now. Well, let me back on. I mean, the comment was beautiful, Jessica. It was like, this is like how to deal with stressors within an interview. So brilliantly done. I love it.
Thank you.
Oh, too awesome. So, love it when you came to us and saying that, okay, you were going to take Aladdin. We knew that this was going to be an awesome one. So one question for you was, how do you position wanting to take a step back for work-life balance and address the perception that you're overqualified for a role?
Oh, I dealt with that a lot because I was actually a director at my old company, but technically I'm a manager at my new company. So number one, I would say it's all BS, right? Because the structure and the titles at every company are completely different. So being a manager in one place is going to be higher or lower than being a director somewhere else. And that's just the nature, because every company has their own strategy. So some places being a director might be higher than being a manager, or it might be called a VP somewhere else if it's a smaller company. So number one, that's just reality, and I'm living that reality right now. Number two, I really do think about my career more like a jungle gym than that ladder. And sometimes you have to take the step, right? Like I broke into the technology industry from the nonprofit. So I don't think my move recently was a step back. I think of it more as a lateral move. Yeah. And again, you're the storyteller of your own career path and narrative. And you just have to figure out, this was an important industry for me to move into. It made more sense for me and my family. I got to learn different skills or, get the certification, whatever it is, you own that narrative. And there's nothing wrong with taking a step back to ultimately take that step forward.
Yeah.
And if people think that, you don't want to work for them. Sorry, Lisa, I know.
Exactly. Choose who you love to work with and what you're doing. So well said. Well, awesome, everyone. Thank you so much, Jessica. For me, it's been such a boon to have you as part of the team, and you can connect up with Jessica throughout the week. And we are going to be going back into Wellness Connection and Break. So go ahead and go to that session. Barbara Bach will be taking you through a little bit of yoga and some mindfulness. So have fun, everybody, and see you soon.
Enjoy yoga. Bye, everybody.